At an altitude of over 3,000 meters in the San Juan Mountains, where cell signals vanish, trees remain cloaked in snow year-round, and cliffs rise like ancient stone walls. There lies a narrow crack hidden deep within the permafrost. For years, no one paid attention to it. Not until the early spring of 2023, when a bright red object quietly emerged, trapped in the melting ice. It wasn't trash, nor the remnants of an ordinary camping trip. It was a high-end child carrier backpack, the kind only seasoned mountaineers tend to use. And it had once belonged to a 15-month-old girl named Mika Sato, who vanished with her father 5 years earlier in these very mountains. Her father, Ethan Sato, 36, was a former U.S. Marine, a survival expert who had endured 2 brutal campaigns in Fallujah. He returned to Denver, built a quiet life with his wife Rebecca, and settled into a routine. On the morning of February 17, 2018, Ethan strapped his daughter to his back and set out on a short hike into the San Juans, as he had done hundreds of times before. Nothing about the day seemed unusual. Clear skies, gentle winds, a familiar trail. At 10:13 a.m., he texted his wife. "She's sleeping. The weather's unreal. Don't worry, we'll be back before dark." But night fell, and Ethan and Mika never returned. The next morning, his SUV still sat motionless at the trailhead. No one knew where the father and daughter had gone. No one knew what had happened. A search was launched immediately. Helicopters, search dogs, mountain rescue teams, red-dotted maps spread across the treacherous slopes. But the snowy wilderness had swallowed everything. No footprints, no signs. Nothing but the silence of rock and wind. 5 years passed. The case was classified as a no-trace disappearance. But then the red backpack surfaced. And it carried with it not just the trace of a missing child, but the echo of a mystery darker than anyone could have imagined. Before we dive into this heartbreaking story, tell us, what city are you in? What's the weather like there? And what time is it on your clock right now? Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a comment as we uncover one of the darkest, real-life mysteries yet. On the night of February 17, 2018, at exactly 9:07 p.m., Rebecca Sato set her phone down on the kitchen table after making her 10th unanswered call. The apartment in Denver was eerily quiet only. The steady hum of the heater and the soft yellow light spilling from the kitchen remained. She had tried to stay calm for over 2 hours, reminding herself that her husband Ethan was a survival expert, a cautious man who never hiked without 3 types of signaling devices and a handgun for bears. But as the clock ticked past 8:45 p.m., that silence began to change its tone. Ethan had promised to be home before sundown. With their 15-month-old daughter in tow, there was no way he'd risk getting trapped on the mountain where nighttime temperatures in the San Juans could drop to 10 below zero. It went against every survival instinct of a man who had endured Iraq and once trekked through the snowbound ranges of Alaska during his time in the service. Rebecca opened her phone again, tapping on the last message Ethan had sent that morning at 10:13 a.m. A selfie filled the screen. Ethan beaming under a forest green beanie, his sunglasses reflecting a brilliant blue sky and the towering pines behind him. Mika was snug in the red child carrier on his back, wearing a tiny knit hat, eyes wide as she gazed up at the sunlight filtering through the trees. Below the photo was a single line of text, "She's sleeping. The weather's unreal. Don't worry, we'll be back before dark." But now it was far too dark. Rebecca stood up, pulled on her coat, and headed straight to the parking garage. The silver Subaru Forester Ethan had driven that morning was still gone. At 9:22 p.m., she dialed the emergency line for the National Park Service. The female dispatcher on the other end was calm and professional, asking for basic details. Rebecca spoke slowly, word by word, even though her mind was spinning. "My husband is Ethan Sato, 36, former Marine, 6 feet tall, brown hair, Japanese American. He took our daughter, Mika, 15 months old. They went trekking near Ridgeway Pass. His car is still at the trailhead. He should have been back by now." She sent them the photo, along with a short video Ethan had taken earlier that day. In it, Mika giggled as Ethan brushed away snow to show her rabbit tracks. A soft breeze rustled through the microphone. "Look, sweetheart, snowshoe hair tracks," Ethan said, his voice deep and gentle. At 10:06 p.m., the Rapid Response Unit in Ouray County received the call from Central Command, a father and infant missing, possibly stranded in the mountains midwinter. Ranger John Whitaker, who had once recovered 3 frozen bodies after a surprise blizzard in 2012, was assigned to lead the search. He was the first to see Ethan's photo, a strong man, proud among the peaks, his child beaming behind him. But the light in that image had faded 8 hours ago. "We're not looking for someone who just got lost," he said quietly. "We're chasing a shadow in the dark. And time isn't on our side." At 12:12 a.m., 3 off-road pickups, an ambulance, and a 6-person team began their night march from the base of Ridgway Pass. The moon was veiled behind thick clouds. The forest loomed like black arms reaching skyward. No one spoke loudly. They all knew. They might be searching for life, but they might also be gathering the final pieces of a story already ending. On the morning of February 18th, winter sunlight cast a harsh glare across the eastern slope of Ridgway Pass, turning the cold snow into a blinding sheet of white. At 6:45 a.m., the first rescue team returned to base after 7 hours of searching through darkness. No tracks, no cries, no scraps of clothing, no signs of shelter. The atmosphere at the makeshift command post, set up right at the trailhead, grew thick with unease. A trained survivalist with a child vanishing completely just a few miles from a main road? That wasn't normal. Ranger John Whitaker stood in front of a large map spread over the hood of a truck, arms tightly crossed, eyes fixed on the red marker lines trails, already searched. No other hikers missing that day. No storms, no dangerous distance. None of this makes sense. The search was intensified. 12 members from the Ouray County Search and Rescue Team, 2 K-9 units, and a helicopter out of Montrose conducting aerial sweeps. But the forest here was like a silent beast. Towering conifers blocked the sunlight, their overlapping branches forming a canopy so thick, even aerial surveillance revealed nothing but a still, dark green carpet, with no disturbance, no motion. Whitaker ordered the area divided into 9 search zones, each with a 1.5-kilometer radius around the last known location. Within each team, 1 member was tasked with logging every abnormal detail: snapped branches, loose snow, dragged prints. But the first 3 days yielded only silence. On the 4th day, a group led by local volunteers ventured through a narrow gulch to the north. While checking the edge of a scree slope, a man named Pete Carlson, a retired structural engineer, slipped on wet rock and fell hard into the snow. As he stood up, he noticed a small, round object protruding from the ice. It was a plastic cap with the words MAM anti-colic printed on it, a baby bottle top. Nearby, a tiny piece of bright red fabric was frozen into the moss-covered stone, no larger than 2 fingers. The group immediately marked the coordinates and radioed it in. The items were transported down to the mountain station. Rebecca sat slumped at a table, hands trembling as she held the fabric inside a Ziploc bag. "This is Mika's bottle cap," she whispered. I recognized it instantly. It's from the anti-colic bottle I bought at Target." There's no mistake. At the same time, forensic analysts confirmed that the red fabric matched the material used in the Osprey Poco AG premium child carrier, the exact model Ethan had. The discovery changed everything. It was the first and only real trace. But instead of narrowing the investigation, it opened a web of contradictions. If Ethan had slipped, why were there no signs of a fall in the snow? If he had become disoriented, why didn't he activate any of his emergency signals? And if Mika had been hurt, how did a lone bottle cap end up separated from everything else? That evening, Rebecca was escorted away from the command zone. She was exhausted, her lips cracked, eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. Ranger Whitaker gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "We haven't stopped," he said, "but I have to be honest with you. This isn't just an accident." At 10:11 p.m., a technician reanalyzed thermal camera footage from the helicopter. One flicker of heat had been dismissed earlier as sunlit stone. But now, they zoomed in frame by frame. It wasn't rock. It was an anomalous heat signature, dome-shaped, low to the ground, with brief signs of movement. It appeared at 5:38 p.m. on the day Ethan and Mika vanished. And after exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds, it disappeared from the screen, leaving nothing behind. Its location sat just beside a northern ice fissure, the same zone Pete Carlson's team had just crossed. On the map, Ranger Whitaker drew a single red dot. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice flat as stone, "we go down there." The following morning, under a biting -8 degrees Celsius chill, Ranger Whitaker's Special Operations Search Team pushed into the area marked as the heat flicker from the helicopter footage. It was a narrow ravine choked by ancient tree roots and moss-covered boulders. Every step had to be calculated. Ice beneath the snow wasn't always visible, and one misstep could mean sliding dozens of meters into a frozen crevice. Near midday, the youngest member of the team, Devin Moore, a former local climbing athlete, spotted something wedged between two slanted stones. A black Garmin sports watch. The screen cracked, the strap bent as if from a heavy impact. When gently pressed, the screen flickered once, then died. The watch was rushed to the analysis center in Montrose. Technicians quickly recovered GPS data from its memory. And from there, the investigation veered onto a completely new trail. According to the data, the watch, confirmed to belong to Ethan Sato, had traveled nearly 4 kilometers southeast from the main trail, along a path not marked on any official hiking map. That route led to a dangerous region locals called Three Cracks, a series of ancient rock fissures split by sheer cliffs and broken glacial shelves. Almost no one ventured there, except for the occasional illegal prospector. A new theory took shape quickly. Perhaps Ethan, in a risky decision, had altered his course. Maybe to avoid weather, maybe in search of a shortcut back. Whatever the reason, the fact remained he had left the original path. And with a child in tow, no one could comprehend why. Rebecca froze upon hearing the news. "He would never do that," she said softly. "Ethan would never change his route. Not with Mika, not ever. But data doesn't lie." And under mounting pressure from the media, public scrutiny, and a growing sense that finally we have direction, the team was ordered to expand their search toward Three Cracks. The following week became a string of desperate missions. Steep, slick rock faces, ice shattering beneath their boots, compasses thrown off by mineral-rich rock layers. On some days, they advanced only a few hundred meters. No footprints were found. No scraps of fabric, no child's belongings. And the deeper they went, the more Ranger Whitaker felt something was off. On the 8th day, a survey team exploring the northern fissure found a small wooden fragment shaped like the handle of a burned object. Under light, burn marks and melted plastic wiring could be seen. But it didn't belong to Ethan. Rebecca confirmed, Ethan never carried anything with wooden parts. All his gear was lightweight composite. Nothing handmade. That's when a terrain analyst quietly approached Whitaker, holding a printed map derived from the Garmin data. "You see the problem here?" he asked, pointing to the route leading to Three Cracks. "This GPS data, it's not live. It's a stored route, possibly from days before. The device might have cached it earlier." Whitaker went silent, his eyes darkening. He understood instantly what this meant. "The watch was found there," he said, "but that doesn't mean Ethan was there." The entire theory collapsed. A full week of manpower, aerial support, emergency funds, wasted on a false lead. The only person unsurprised was Rebecca. She looked Whitaker straight in the eye, her voice raw. "I told you from the beginning. He never would have changed course. Not with her." The watch was now considered an item dropped, or perhaps placed in the remote terrain to deliberately mislead the investigation. But that question at that time was still too vast, too unsettling for anyone to say aloud. On the 9th night, the command team moved to scale back the search radius. But Whitaker didn't sleep. He sat in his vehicle, map open across his lap, retracing snow-fed creeks, emergency escape paths, and natural bottlenecks. He didn't yet know that just weeks later, a sudden blizzard would permanently reshape the trajectory of the case, and that the next real clue wouldn't come from people at all, but from the melting ice. On the morning of March 14th, 2023, at an altitude of 3,150 meters on the southeastern slope of the San Juan Mountains, sunlight slanted across melting ice cliffs, revealing fresh fissures formed by a sudden spike in temperature after an unusually long winter. Lucas Hofer, a 41-year-old Swiss mountaineer, was making his final survey before returning home. He preferred isolated climbs, no signposts, no checkpoints, no one around but the wind and stone. At 10:17 a.m., while navigating a steep, eroded rock face, Lucas caught sight of a red speck wedged in a narrow gap between two icy boulders. At first, he assumed it was a scrap of fabric, but the position was too unnatural, jammed deep between rocks, as if something or someone had forced it in with tremendous pressure. He tried to descend. The crevice was only about 40 centimeters wide. Lucas anchored himself to a rock bolt and lowered into the gap, the damp cold creeping down his collar. After 10 minutes of clearing debris, his hand brushed against coarse, freezing nylon, then found a plastic buckle. It was a red child carrier backpack, the expensive kind designed for long mountain treks. The logo was scratched and faded, but the aluminum frame remained intact. The safety straps, headrest, and foam padding were still recognizable, though the color had dulled and the metal parts showed slight rust. It took Lucas nearly 30 minutes to haul it up onto the rock. As he stood staring at the strange object lying among snow and stone, he knew he had just touched a fragment of something grave. This wasn't a lost item. It was evidence. The next day, the backpack was delivered to the Ouray Ranger Station. John Whitaker, retired since 2020, received the call. The voice on the other end was one he hadn't expected to hear again from the old case. "We need you to come in." Immediately, he drove down from Montrose. When he saw the pack, he froze. Though the color had faded, the design, the frame, the straps, there was no mistaking it. Whitaker bent down, brushing away the crust of ice clinging to the zipper. He looked at it as if staring into the face of someone long gone, the young father who had vanished from the map of the living. "Call forensics," he said. "This is the new starting point. And this time, we won't go off course." The backpack was rushed to the Colorado State Forensics Lab in Grand Junction. The lead investigator was Dr. Margaret Vale, an expert in environmental degradation and material analysis. She had previously helped determine why steel structures collapsed after floods. This time, her subject was nylon fabric and plastic fasteners, but the secrets within were no less revealing than any blueprint. Dr. Vale used spectroscopy to measure UV degradation levels in the nylon. The results made the team step back. The fading, brittleness, and breakdown of the fabric indicated it had only been exposed to sunlight for a few months. She examined the inner foam padding, no mold, no signs of prolonged moisture exposure. The foam was dry and elastic. The plastic buckles, while slightly corroded, had not yet lost their structural integrity. "If this backpack had been left outdoors for 5 years," she said, "it wouldn't still look like this." The environmental team collected soil samples from the zippers and waste straps. Chemical residues indicated the soil came from an enclosed environment with stable humidity and temperature, like a rock shelter, cave, or other natural hiding place. The conclusion: the backpack had not remained at the discovery site for 5 years. It had been hidden elsewhere, in a concealed, sunless, weather-protected location, and only surfaced after melting ice and heavy runoff flushed it out. Whitaker immediately returned to the regional geologic maps. He traced backward along the water's path following the March rainstorms. A hydrological map was drafted. From the point where the backpack was found, water strong enough to carry such weight could only have come from a single upstream zone, an area known as Widow's Ridge Canyon, buried deep in the wilderness, with no trails, no footprints, and far outside the 2018 search perimeter. With the scientific evidence and water flow data in hand, Whitaker returned to the coordination office, eyes steady with the resolve he'd carried at the very beginning of the case. This time, he said, we're not looking for people. We're looking for the place where this was hidden for 5 years. 9 days after the red backpack was discovered, a specialized terrain response team was urgently assembled under the directive of the Ouray County government in coordination with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and the National Park Service. The man called back as field consultant was none other than former Ranger John Whitaker. Widow's Ridge was a name given by locals to a narrow, perilous gorge, where 3 glacial streams converge into a single escape path before dropping into the southern Snow Gulch. This area didn't appear on any public hiking maps and had never been surveyed in the 2018 search. Its terrain was too steep, too unstable, and offered no reason for anyone carrying a child to venture into it. But now they knew. The reason may not have been human. It was the water. All hydrological data pointed to one direction. The backpack had come from the lowest basin of Widow's Ridge. On March 25, 2023, a 7-person team set out. A geotechnical specialist, 3 mountain-trained tactical officers, a rescue physician, a field forensic technician, and Whitaker himself. They carried 3 DLIDAR maps, positioning equipment, and one goal: to find a place dry, enclosed, and stable enough for an object like that backpack to remain intact for 5 years without decomposing. There was no trail. They clung to tree roots, drove bolts into stone, hacked through forest with axes, and lowered themselves one by one down crumbling rock steps. 70 meters below the main slope, they reached a world where light could not enter. Everything was damp, cold, and carried the scent of rotting earth mixed with breathing stone. On the second day in the gorge, at 1:44 p.m., the team's youngest member, a geotechnical engineer named Lyle Walker, noticed an odd cluster of dry leaves, neatly gathered at the edge of a crevice. Clearing the pile, he found a natural alcove about 1 meter wide, extending roughly 6 meters deep. Inside was a dry rock hollow, windless, with a firm, flat floor like a primitive shelter. They aimed their lights in. At the deepest corner of the cavity was a body. Human remains lying on their left side, the spine curled inward as if in a fetal position, bracing against the cold. Nearby were the rusted frame of another backpack, a cracked plastic water bottle, a partially decayed protein bar wrapper, and traces of a small fire ring near the wall. No blood, no signs of struggle. Only the stillness of resignation, like someone who knew death was coming and accepted it. The forensic officer knelt down. Based on skeletal structure, height, jaw features, and associated belongings, there was no need for DNA confirmation. It was Ethan Sato. Whitaker sank to the stone floor, gripping the broken frame of the backpack. His eyes held no tears, only the slow burn of exhaustion and something that looked like guilt. He gave everything he had, he whispered. He didn't run. He didn't quit. He just ran out of time. But the most significant discovery wasn't Ethan's body. While clearing loose earth near the alcove's mouth, the forensic technician touched a strange metal object, a hand tool with a wooden handle wrapped in green electrical tape. It was a crude digging implement, heavy, with a curved blade, seemingly handmade. This wasn't military gear, nor was it mountaineering equipment. No one brings something like that on a hike. And crucially, it didn't match any item listed in Ethan's documented gear inventory. Whitaker picked it up, his face darkening. This, he said, didn't belong to Ethan. And if it's here, it means someone else was. The forensic lead proposed an initial theory. Ethan may have been injured, fallen from a ledge, and crawled here on his own to seek shelter. But whoever brought this tool either found him afterward or had already been there. And if they'd stood in that hollow, if they'd seen the child, they knew where Mika was and what had happened to her. Silence fell over the team. The atmosphere no longer felt like a field investigation. It was a quiet courtroom set between stone and human remains. Mika was not there. No trace of the child, no scraps of clothing, no toys, no DNA. Only Ethan's body and a tool that wasn't his. That night, the digging tool was taken to a sealed lab for analysis. But Whitaker didn't need the results. Ethan didn't vanish alone, he said. He was left behind. Under the cold white lights of the evidence examination lab in Grand Junction, the crude digging tool lay alone on a metal table, surrounded by trace analysis equipment, microfiber scanners, and DNA testing devices. It looked as if it had come from another century. A hand-forged curved blade, unevenly sharpened, with patches of rusted steel. A rough wooden handle, splintered and scarred, and wrapped tightly around the grip was a strip of green electrical tape, an unusual green, both faded and strangely vivid. Dr. Margaret Vale wasn't expecting to find fingerprints. 5 years in damp, cold conditions would have erased nearly everything. But she still followed protocol, scanning for dried sweat, collecting dead skin cells, and then turning to the most telling feature, the tape wrapping style. Everyone has a unique way of wrapping tape. Some start from the base, others from the top. Some layer it neatly, others wrap it at an angle like a herringbone. This wooden handle showed a distinct diagonal wrap, not a common method, but one that carried clear personal signature, like a fingerprint in the wilderness. Back at the ranger office in Ouray, John Whitaker sat before an old filing cabinet. He wasn't searching a database. Records like the one he needed didn't live in digital systems. He pulled thick, dust-covered folders, handwritten reports, mostly minor infractions, off-trail camping, unauthorized campfires, expired fishing permits. But he was looking for something very specific: poachers, those who illegally harvested minerals, herbs, or wildlife in restricted zones. By late afternoon, he found it. Report number 216F, dated June 11, 2016. Filed by Whitaker himself. The incident involved a couple named Clive and Ramona Atkins, temporarily residing near Telluride, who had been caught camping illegally with suspicious digging tools believed to be used for unlawful mineral extraction. Attached to the file was a quick Polaroid snapshot. In it, an old canvas bag, a water bottle, and a digging tool, with a wooden handle wrapped in green electrical tape at the same distinct diagonal angle as the one found in Ethan's rock hollow. Whitaker froze. He remembered it clearly, Clive giving a smirk when warned, "We're just digging up some rocks." "We didn't kill anyone." Ramona stood silently behind him, pressed close, saying nothing. They had no IDs on them, just a handwritten note with a shaky address for a rented cabin. The report read, "No contraband found. Released after 8 hours of detainment. No further violations in this area since. Until now." He forwarded the report to investigators from the Federal Park Service and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Within 24 hours, they confirmed Clive and Ramona Atkins had left Telluride in December 2018, 3 months after Ethan and Mika went missing. They sold their old car, closed their bank accounts, left no forwarding contact, and vanished. But the FBI had methods for tracking. They traced food stamp transactions from a support center in Missouri, cross-checked the names against Medicaid data. Finally, one name surfaced, Ramona E. Atkins, listed for a prenatal checkup in January 2019 at a rural health clinic in Shannon County, Missouri. At the same address, years later, elementary school records showed enrollment for a biracial girl, born in 2017, named Addie Atkins. Whitaker stared at the screen. He didn't need to hear anything else. "Mika," he said quietly. "Her name is Mika." The rusted digging tool said nothing. But it had already pointed the way to the person who brought it into the cave, who stood there as Ethan took his final breath, and who walked away with the child into the night. The red dirt road twisted deep into a dense patch of forest in Shannon County, Missouri, eroded by spring rains. There was no street name, no house number, just a termite-eaten wooden mailbox with a faint, handwritten label, C and R. Atkins. On the afternoon of April 4th, 2023, an unmarked SUV came to a quiet stop at the end of the road in front of a small wooden cabin. Inside were 3 people, an FBI agent, an investigator from the National Park Service, and seated between them, wearing an old coat, with the same unchanging eyes he'd carried since 2018, was John Whitaker. He didn't bring handcuffs. Just a white plastic bag, and inside it, the rusted digging tool with the green taped handle, the only thing he needed for this unofficial interrogation. They stepped onto the warped wooden porch. The door opened after the second knock. Clive Atkins appeared, older, thinner, but his eyes were unchanged, a mix of suspicion and hostility. "We don't need anything," he said. "We're not selling anything," Whitaker replied, hands loose at his sides. "We're here to talk. About Colorado." A twitch flickered in Clive's eyes. Behind him, Ramona stepped into view, her hair now graying, her shoulders thin and sharp. She froze when she saw Whitaker, and when her eyes drifted to the white bag in his hand, her face went pale. No one spoke for the next 5 seconds. Only the sound of wind rustling through the woods and the creak of floorboards beneath Clive as he slowly stepped back, not resisting, not threatening, just retreating, as if he'd known this ending would come one day. "Come in," Ramona said softly. "Leave the girl out in the yard. She doesn't know anything." Inside, the cabin was clean, modest, filled with the smell of pine wood and cookies. On the dining table sat 3 plastic cups and a child's crayon drawing green scribbles. Red sun, a wobbly mountain. At the bottom corner, a messy name in block letters, Addie. Ramona sat down first. When Whitaker placed the digging tool on the table, the crinkle of the plastic wrap was enough to make her start crying. "He didn't deserve to die like that," she said. "I know that. We were scared. We're not bad people. But we were scared." No pressure was needed. No lawyer, no bright light in her face. Just too many years of silence, too many nights hearing a child say, "Mom," in a house with no blood relation, and a body without a grave lying alone in the mountains. Clive, still at the window, didn't turn. His voice was low. "We were out there for ginseng. Only thing that brings in money that season. That shovel. It's mine. They told everything." On the day Ethan went missing, they had been digging near the base of the mountain, over a mile from where the backpack was later found. The weather turned colder, faster than expected. As they prepared to leave, they heard a child crying. Not an animal, a human child. They followed the sound to a crevice. Ethan was there, his leg broken, face pale, lips cracked. Mika lay asleep in his arms, breathing weak but steady. Ethan knew he was dying. Clive remembered every word. "I'm not gonna make it. Take her. Get her out of here. Don't call the cops. Don't let her die because of me." Ramona shook as she recounted that moment. I think he was afraid of being blamed. I don't know why, but he begged us to just take Mika." They did. They left Ethan with a bottle of water, some food, and their digging tool in their rush. They hiked down in darkness, slipped through back trails to avoid being seen. At first, they meant to take Mika to a clinic, but they didn't. "She didn't cry," Ramona said. "She just looked at me. And I knew I wouldn't ever leave her." For a moment, the room was silent. No one needed more details. A few minutes later, the FBI agent gently placed a hand on Ramona's shoulder. Clive did not resist as he was escorted outside. The little girl named Addie was picked up by a child services worker from the backyard. She didn't scream, didn't ask questions. She simply clutched her stuffed animal tighter and looked back at the shrinking cabin behind the car. When the DNA sample from the little girl was sent to the federal laboratory in Quantico, there was no longer any doubt. But the process still had to follow protocol. The buccal cell swab from the child registered in the Shannon County Elementary School system under the name Addie Atkins was compared to the DNA profile of Rebecca Sato, which had been stored since 2019 when she voluntarily submitted her information to missing child databases. It took exactly 43 hours to get official confirmation. At 8:17 a.m. on April 7, 2023, the private communication line of the National Park Service broadcast an emergency alert to all related agencies. DNA match confirmed. Child identified as Mika Sato, daughter of deceased subject Ethan Sato. Status: alive. John Whitaker received the news at his desk. He said nothing, just gave a small nod. The room stayed silent for nearly a full minute, before the lead investigator from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation said quietly, "We need a press release within 24 hours. This is going to explode nationwide." And they weren't wrong. The first broadcast aired that evening on NBC. Miracle after 5 years. Missing child found alive in Missouri. Then came CNN, CBS, and every national news outlet. The headlines varied, but at the heart of every story was the same image. A photo of Ethan and Mika on their last morning. She nestled in the red carrier. Ethan's face calm and steady. Mika's small, eyes lifted toward the sunlight. That photo played on a loop, becoming a kind of collective memory the country couldn't look away from. Rebecca Sato was flown to Denver on a private federal flight. She spoke to no reporters. She made no appearances. She brought only one item, a drawing Mika had made when she was a year old, scribbled, meaningless to anyone else, but the only thing Rebecca had kept in that childless apartment. Mika, or Addie, as she knew herself, was now under care at a federally operated child protection facility. She didn't cry. She didn't ask about her parents. All she knew was that her name was Addie, and her parents were Clive and Ramona. Their absence didn't provoke much reaction. Mika had lived long enough in a closed world to know not to ask questions. Before the reunion, child psychologists worked with both sides. They told Rebecca, "She may not call you mom. She may not hug you. She may not remember anything or feel anything. Please be prepared." Rebecca nodded. "She doesn't need to remember. I just need her to be alive." The meeting was held in a secured room with one-way glass, cameras, and 2 observers. Rebecca entered, wearing a white shirt, no makeup. She sat down, her hands clasped tightly. The opposite door opened. A social worker led Mika in, holding a small, purple stuffed animal. The girl didn't hesitate. She didn't avoid eye contact. She simply looked at the woman sitting across from her with calm, clear eyes, devoid of memory. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice catching. "Hi, sweetheart." Mika didn't respond. She sat in the chair, silent, then slowly held out her stuffed animal, as if offering to share. Rebecca reached out and accepted it. "Your name is Mika," she said, as if speaking to the wind. "I'm your mom. You don't remember yet, but I've waited 5 years for you." Mika stayed quiet, then looked down at the plastic necklace around her neck, 4 colorful beads on a thin string. She took it off, placed it on the table in front of Rebecca. No words. A social worker noted, initial contact, calm, no fear response. Shared personal item. Communication limited. Outside, the news cycle was shifting from miracle to controversy. Evening programs raised questions. Were Clive and Ramona criminals? Or had they truly loved and raised this child? One commentator said, "This isn't a traditional kidnapping case. It's a gray area, and justice doesn't always have the vocabulary for gray." But for Rebecca, the case had already ended, the moment her daughter placed the plastic necklace on the table. The state of Missouri held its first court hearing on April 17, 2023, exactly 9 days after Mika Sato's identity was confirmed. Clive and Ramona Atkins were charged with 2 offenses: failure to report a missing person and unlawful custody and care of a minor without legal guardianship. No kidnapping charge was filed because Ethan Sato was believed to have willingly handed the child over in his final moments, and no one could prove otherwise. The couple did not hire private attorneys. A court-appointed public defender sat beside them, but throughout the hearings, it was Ramona who spoke on their behalf. Through tears, she testified, "We thought we'd be blamed. And then, we fell in love with her. We loved her like our own." The prosecution did not dispute the facts. Over 5 years, Mika had not been abused, neglected, or malnourished. She was taught to read, kept up on vaccinations, and lived in an environment not ideal, but not harmful. The state judge sighed as he delivered the sentence. This court does not rule on emotions. It rules on actions. Clive was sentenced to 18 months of suspended imprisonment and 5 years probation with no contact with minors. Ramona received 12 months suspended, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory psychological counseling. Neither were permanently barred from seeing Mika, but any future contact would require approval from her legal guardian, Rebecca Sato. The media immediately split into two camps. One labeled it a kidnapping in moral disguise. The other hailed Ramona as the silent second mother. Talk shows debated. Articles re-examined every detail. But only one person never spoke to the press. Not once. Not ever. Rebecca. In May, she and her daughter quietly relocated from Denver. Their new address was not made public. In a letter to the court, she wrote, "I don't want my child to grow up dictated by public opinion. She is not a victim. She is a survivor." More accurately, Mika Sato began long-term psychological therapy. She remembered nothing of the San Juan Mountains, nothing of her father, nothing of that snowy morning. But each time she picked up a crayon to draw, she often drew a single mountain and a tiny figure standing at its base, arms outstretched. No one had taught her to draw it that way. The digging tool with the green-taped handle was sealed and placed in the evidence vault, where it would remain for 25 years before being destroyed. John Whitaker retired a second time, this time for good. Before leaving, he returned to the summit of Ridgeway Pass one June morning, stood silently beside a sign that read, "Caution, Avalanche Risk," and left behind a small engraved stone. He didn't get lost. He gave her a chance. No one ever moved that stone. The case file was closed under investigation code COL-0218-ETH-MKA. The final note read, "Case resolved. Justice rendered. Moral ambiguity, unresolved."